We're going to talk football today with John Harty, who's a former San Francisco 49er. He wears 2 Super Bowl rings, and he's going to talk about what it's like to be in the NFL. He also, at one point, was the president of Westmar University. He's now a sales representative for a company in the Sioux City area. And John Harty knows what it's like to play in the Super Bowl because the very first year he was in the NFL, he played in Super Bowl 16. Hi, John. Welcome to WHO Radio.
Yeah.
And you have had quite a life, haven't you? It must almost seem like a dream to go back to Super Bowl 16 and think about what it was like to be in the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, I mean, with each year that passes, and the numbers keep racking up, Super Bowl 16's starting to seem like a long time ago.
Yeah. Tell us what it's like. I mean, that's the obvious thing people want to know all the time is what is it like for a player to go through these couple of weeks of getting all psyched up for the Super Bowl?
Well, it was a extremely fun experience, and the thing that was fairly unique in that, in my opinion, was that throughout the course of the season, when you I guess it depends on your perspective of the game, but when you look at it when you're in the game, and it's your livelihood, and that's how you support yourself and your family, and obviously each year that you can play makes a big difference for your future in building a foundation right out of college. And so I guess the point I'm trying to arrive at is that to some extent it's a fairly stressful endeavor.
Yeah.
And, it's demanding physically, but mentally as well, and how you perform really sets the tone for your longevity in the NFL.
So you are thinking of those things. For example, are you thinking of the money thing? Because you get more money, right, if you win than if you lose.
Well, I think, to finish answering your first question, there's a fair amount of stress, I think, throughout the course of the year. So you have a tendency to be uptight. And in the Super Bowl that I was in, the first one of my rookie year, out of all the games that season, that was probably the most relaxed, most go out and just have fun game that I played.
The Super Bowl was?
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt, uncomparable. So,
why?
I don't know if it was the last game of the season or, you've had 2 weeks building up to it and you're there. And, there's a lot of irony in that when you think about, preseason game. Quite frankly, back when I was playing, I usually was more nervous for that than I was for the Super Bowl. So.
What about like the playoff games? Are those really nerve-wracking?
Well, I think when you look at the course of a whole season, when you get into the playoffs and the hunt for the Super Bowl and ultimately participating in that game, that's where it's truly a fun experience, in my opinion. I mean, it was just we got to win. There's not a game next week if you don't win, so there was pressure in that respect. But I don't know. For some reason, the playoffs and the Super Bowl were always the most fun games to be a part of for me in my career.
Well, that's fascinating because, as of course we see the media reports, newspapers, television, it just seems like it's just all hype for a couple of weeks here. And I think that the guys in the game would be so overwhelmed with that it would just almost get them too nervous to play it. But you're saying the opposite, if you treat it with the right attitude, right?
Well, the experience for me anyway was the opposite to that. And again, it was the most probably... the playoffs, the Super Bowl were some of the most relaxed. Have fun. Obviously you want to win. I think that's been demonstrated as part of the 49er organization, certainly within the spectrum of time that I was there. The commitment to win was unrelenting, commitment to be the best, and that attitude permeated throughout that whole organization.
Now, John Harty, you were a defensive lineman, and you were an All-American at University of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And in reading about your background, is it true that you quit playing college football after the first 2 years?
Yeah, that's correct.
Why?
Well, at the time I said a lot of that was personal, and I suppose we're all adults enough to get into that. But the reality of the situation was that I felt like there was a lot of people that emulated certain athletes that I didn't think, quite frankly, lived up to the billing. And I thought that there was some, at times for athletes there was preferential treatment. I think, and I guess the other side of that is a lot of people really had that the whole thing out of perspective, in my opinion. And I think in my life at that time, it was a point where your idealistical beliefs and reality kind of collide.
So you just had to get get away from it.
And I think maybe the other piece of that was everywhere in my career we'd always won. I'd always won. I mean, when I was in high school, we always won. It was kind of a frustrating experience my first couple of years at Iowa because we weren't winning.
Yeah.
You know, when I got done with the game, when I was a freshman, I played 100 and some plays against UCLA in the Coliseum out west. And, you know, that's equivalent to about 3 games for a defense, or at least 2. And that was as a freshman starting in Iowa. So, I mean, I had some degree of frustration there at that point.
Yeah.
And
so you quit after 2 years, but then you came back when Hayden Fry started coaching, right?
yes, that's correct.
And did the atmosphere there change?
Yeah, well, I don't want to create the wrong perception there because I think there was a lot of good people involved in my first 2 years. You know, some of them are still in the Iowa City area. One of my coaches specifically, probably one of the best technical coaches I ever had in my career, that being Bill Whistler. He was a part of that coaching staff, and, you know, that's one of the reasons I went to Iowa in the first place, to learn from his tutelage as a coach, because he'd played pro ball and I wanted to learn from him. And I did learn a lot and ultimately helped me advance in my athletic career.
But still, in the first couple of years under Hayden Fry, you still didn't have a winning season.
I think the attitude changed. I think there was renewed optimism, and, you know, I felt like football was going to be a part of my future going forward, so I wanted to give it another shot, and went in and was focused and wanted to be successful, and I think we had you know, a commitment to get the job done. Obviously, from the record, you know, we came up short a few times in there, but you know, I think we definitely built the foundation for what ultimately, you know, spanned throughout Hayden's career there, and you know, the consecutive bowl appearances and so on. So I think we were definitely a part of helping turn that program around.
John, I think what surprised me is the fact that you played all the 4 years you played. You never had a winning season, and yet you were selected in the second round of the draft. So you proved that you don't have to be part of a necessarily winning team in order to make it in the NFL.
Well, that's true. I mean, I had a lot of good experiences despite, you know, not necessarily winning and playing in postseason action, you know, through my career at Iowa in my years there. But I think I had a lot of, you know, good coaching. You know, I mentioned Bill Whistler. The other gentleman that coached me was Dan McCarney, who's, you know, I've said before, if that man can't find a way to motivate you, then you don't have a pulse. I mean, he's the kind of his enthusiasm is contagious, and his competitive spirit, and you know, he certainly did a lot to help advance my career as well. So I had, you know, and then Hayden obviously helped breathe new life into that program there, and you know, I think his record stands for itself.
Our guest is John Harty. He's a former San Francisco 49er, and he has played in the Super Bowl. As a matter of fact, his very first year in the NFL, he played in the Super Bowl. John, do you still wear your Super Bowl rings?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, I was in the business community. It's certainly a conversation piece, and it helps crack a door open for you. And obviously, once the door is cracked, you got to get your foot in, and once you have both feet in, then you got to make some other things happen. But you know, they definitely, you know, are a conversation piece and help, you know, provide a nice segue into any business communication that you need to cover.
John, you had a foot injury and had lots of trouble with injuries over the years, and then eventually left the NFL and came back to Iowa. Was that tough to go from your very first season playing in the Super Bowl to having injuries and then having to come back home?
Well, you know, they say that adversity builds character, so I think my experience, you know, developed a lot of character within myself. I certainly had my string of unusual injuries, and I remember, in fact, earlier this week I was in Chicago having dinner with a group of colleagues, and one of the people there asked me if the experience in the NFL was glamorous, and I started explaining, you know, what the life's really like in there. And season's over, then you have surgery, you rehab, and you go back for another round, and somewhere I think I kind of lost the attention of the questioner. Yeah, it was frustrating, but at the same time, you know, the whole experience there was very educational. I learned a lot. It helped shape me, you know, in terms of attitude and desire, and you know, what it takes to win and become disciplined and focused. And you know, those are things that you know, we talk about. But when you're competing at that level, you have a major operation, and you get back and work your way back into a starting position. Which became almost an annual thing for me for several years. You know, that means more to me, actually, in terms of accomplishment than the Super Bowl ring.
We see the glamorous part. We see the few hours down on the field. Maybe it's not so glamorous for some, but for those of us that like to live out our lives vicariously through you down there on the field, we don't see what happens off the field. The the lonely times, the tough times. You've got to keep working out. It's painful with the injuries. And then you come back home, and what happens after you're out of that lifestyle when you try to come back? For instance, you had to come finish college, didn't you?
Yeah, I needed to finish my undergraduate, and got that done quickly. And that's always a good news, bad news thing too. In a way, I'm just close to finishing an MBA, and I look back on that, and if I'd got it done the first time through without having to devote a little time, post college, I could have ended up having a PhD by this time.
I'm a college professor, and I can't picture having John Harty sitting there in my class. If you're on the front line of the, sitting in the front row, one of the front linemen there.
I'd like to think that they, believe I add some degree of, cerebral intelligence and conversation to the discourse in the class, but. I think the good news is when you go back, I think you have some real life experience that you can apply the information to.
Yes.
The graduate program I'm in currently, for example, I feel like just about everything I learned in the classroom I can apply in a professional setting in short order. So, it's a trade-off, quite frankly.
It was pretty amazing, though, when you were named president of Westmar University then, considering that you didn't finish at Iowa when you were there and you had to kind of catch up when you came back, and then to think that you'd be elevated to president of a university.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity. It was a very unique one, and that was one that was full of challenge. There's challenge and there's act of God, and I've always been kind of drawn to that challenge, and to some extent, underdog situation that it somewhat appeals to me when people say it can't be done to try to prove those folks wrong. I took on that challenge up in Northwest Iowa to provide leadership and try to pull that institution out of a spiral that was headed ultimately to failure and closure.
Was there any way that Westmar could have been saved?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what led me to accept that challenge. It was in pretty sad condition, basically on all fronts from an academic standpoint. There was an awful lot of good faculty there, a lot of good people there. It was difficult to really point to a program and say, this is really how we can recruit students here. The average scholarship was at least double what it needed to be in terms of, your funds coming in and your donations by alumni and friends. But, every institution's got people out there that have been, extremely successful. And, had we had more time to develop, cultivate, and get those people excited about the direction, that might have been a different story.
Yeah.
But you can only massage so many, key points and advance them. 6 months or a year just doesn't provide enough of a window of opportunity to get that done. But
we're talking with John Harty, former San Francisco 49er. And, John, tell folks what you're doing now.
Well, you mentioned coming back to Iowa. I think one thing that I think, when I'm out on the East Coast or the West Coast, a lot of times you run into people and they say, Iowa, well, why would you want to live there? Well, both in my athletic career, my business career, and education, working in those different areas, I've had the luxury of traveling all over across this country. And I'll tell you what, Iowa's a pretty hard place to be to call home and raise a family. And I've always been a real advocate for the state, and I believe in the quality of life here and the caliber of the people in the state. And so I've been proud to call that place home. In fact, some of the reasons that I've had the various careers, for a person that's 40 years old, I've had quite a few, been in, obviously the NFL education business, consulting, but I wanted to stay here. I wanted to, develop roots here, families here,
right,
and wanted my kids to have some stability. So
you're now a sales representative for a major gelatin company, which I didn't even know they had them here, but there's a major manufacturer of gelatin.
Yeah, great organization. I developed a relationship several years ago with this company in kind of a consultative basis at that time, and got to know some of the folks there, and they got to know me. And when I, Westmar transitioned from Westmar, and was looking at what's the next challenge. That was certainly one of the first places I looked, because they are a very high class, high caliber organization, the largest single site gelatin manufacturing facility in the world.
That's just outside Sioux City, and we're not talking about gelatin that we eat. We're talking about things that are used in products like film and X-rays, and it even coats pills that we swallow, right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, the applications of gelatin. The real core applications are edible, anything from gummy bears, gummy worms, to the Jell-O dessert products, to the pharmaceutical area for hard and soft capsule applications.
So who do you sell to as a sales rep for the company? Are you selling to other companies, or are you using gelatin products in their manufactured goods?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we provide basically we convert from a raw material into a product in gelatin, what I like to believe is the most high quality gelatin available to the customers.
And the raw product is derived from pigs?
Actually, pork skins, cattle bones, and cattle hide.
Cattle bones?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're eating gelatin, we're eating cattle bones?
Well, it's a product of that as a raw material. That's correct. You know what they say, Steve? The only thing that goes to waste on the cattle and the pork is the moo and the oink.
Well, John, it sure has been fun talking to you today. What goes through your mind? You sit and watch the Super Bowl since you've been through a couple of them, and very first rookie year on the 49ers, you got your Super Bowl ring, you won the game. So what is it like for you to sit there at home and watch it? What goes through your mind?
Well, it's an interesting, it's a relaxation time, I guess, for me. I don't, till we get into the postseason play and the Super Bowl, usually I don't really watch a whole lot of football because
really?
I usually have something else to do, or my kids have an event or something. But
so you got so used to it that now you don't even think that much about it.
Well, it's kind of I try to compare that to like an accountant. If you worked on taxes all day, you probably wouldn't want to come home and pop in a 2-hour video on how to do a tax return. So I spent a lot of my life. I like to stay abreast with it.
Thanks so much, John, for being with us today.
Yeah, Steve, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and hope someday when I put my book together, I'd like to look at doing something from a male and female perspective at some point.
That'd be great. Okay.
Hey, it was my pleasure to be with you.
Thanks so much. John Harty, former San Francisco 49er and former president of Westmar University, now a sales rep for a gelatin company outside Sioux City.